Now, delighted to be presenting the football show tonight. You have Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent here with us. Dan, how are you?
Michael, how are things?
Good, and Mick McCarthy, OTB's Mick McCarthy, is ready with any transfer news as well. So, transfer deadline day, Dan, does it have the same mystique to it, the same excitement to it that it had a couple of years ago?
I think it's probably not. It's lost the magic it had in its heyday when it got to the point when Sky then had to ban, stop reporters being outside of grounds as they're sort of accosted by a group of cheering fans with sex toys hanging around in the backwards, like inflatable ones. I mean, that was the high. Particularly as it was like they were at Stoke to announce the loan signing of a player from Leeds, and it was being sort of greeted like a Eurovision victory back in the day or something. And it was just theatre rather. And look, that was entertaining. You also had probably crazy transfers that happened, whereas look, stuff is still happening. There's still big clubs involved in deals, but maybe it doesn't have that energy of Man City getting all that money and sort of blowing it that they did, Robinho and a couple of these things that you would do towards the end of a window. It's not quite that. But yeah, I think, it's reached a point of sort of an element of fatigue with the constant countdown clock. But I say that, punters, fans, they love transfers.
Yeah.
They absolutely love transfers. And you see, I saw something this morning online, just like this fake account that's just nabbing everyone. But it's the best thing to be, it's an easy hit to be a fake transfer account, because it doesn't matter if it's got 2 followers. People just want the hit of transfer news. Some people, I think, are more engaged by transfers sometimes than by actually watching football. The prospect of seeing someone be signed just causes this flurry of activity in a way that actual games do. So I might just be cynical and fatigued by it for years of it. There's nothing, I know the Matt Doherty thing we'll talk about is obviously outstanding. Work-wise, I'm not necessarily here staring at phones waiting for something to come through, which sometimes will be the case on various transfer deadline days. It's not really like that tonight. Chidozie Ogbeni, it's gone a bit quiet. That could be something that maybe happens. And sometimes that's a bit of a buzz, but I don't know, Mick. It's part of the game. I think the January one certainly is the summer one still has a bit more meaning to it. The January one in recent years, it's only clubs who are really in a bad way are trying to do loans and short-term deals. It's not quite where you make your statement signings or what. Andy Carroll was done in January, wasn't he? There was a couple of sort of big ones at various times. There's still a few, obviously. There has been in this window, but more, adding depth to your squad rather than maybe the summer ones maybe feel a little bit more substantial.
I ended up down a rabbit hole of Harry Redknapp's best transfer stories and deadline day stories the other night, watching videos. It was interesting to say the least, but I don't think it's at that level anymore. I don't think you hear that kind of there's less crack in it, shall we say. That's probably the best way of putting it.
I think that, as I said, the crack is probably influenced by some of the Sky stuff stopping, and okay, you had Peter out and Wingy in a car park or whatever, but there's still stuff that happens. There's still a lot of Harry Redknapp type characters involved in the game. They're not necessarily rolling down the window, leaving the sort of West Ham or Spurs or wherever he was, Portsmouth training ground to explain that he signed Nico Kranjčar again. But those figures are still knocking around the place, but I know what you mean. Maybe to the same, not to the same degree. I've had this point before. Newcastle are playing tonight. Just watching it earlier, the scenes are a bit sort of massive emotion for them, to try and get to a cup final. Not really, the Newcastle thing doesn't do anything for me, unfortunately. But they are the club with the money that you thought would do crazy stuff, but it's almost like a compliment to them that they haven't really lost their minds. They are the one with the finances there to do crazy stuff, but they're not doing it. And generally, the clubs that are quite smart on their recruitment, you had the Brighton one in the last couple of days where Moses Caicedo, who's wants to leave and has this clearly with his agent does this series of tweets explaining why he wants to leave, and it doesn't work because Brighton are pretty well set in how they run themselves, and now they don't need to do this. And you have Chelsea have been doing a bit of mad stuff in this window because they're a little bit crazy at the moment. They don't really know what they are, and generally the clubs that are smart aren't involved in that, and that's maybe why there's more of them possibly than, there's still a Forest or Chelsea or someone always doing something, but they're probably maybe they're minority now in the Premier League. Spurs again involved in a lot of stuff, but then they're sort of not sure what they are either at the moment, potentially.
Speaking of Spurs, obviously, I wouldn't have a massive interest in soccer, but the Matt Doherty
football.
Well,
I had the over/under on soccer references in the hour.
We previewed the football league or reviewed the football league in the last hour, but the Matt Doherty one definitely.
I'm soccer correspondent for the Independent, so I can't actually. I can't actually have a go here.
The Matt Doherty one definitely piqued a lot of people's interest. Just talk me through exactly how it happened. A lot of people look at it and think, how did Matt Doherty end up, in Spain in La Liga with?
Yeah, no, well, it hasn't actually happened yet, but this is one that it looks like it's just pieces of a jigsaw, maybe just need to come together with other deals. I think the Matt Doherty one, I think there's a natural, I was writing about this today, there's a natural instinct of Matt Doherty to Atletico Madrid. It's that whole thing of there's an Irish player or a player synonymous with English football linked with some big, a European household name or superpower, and it's that's mad, isn't it? But I suppose where football is now, you sort of have to just reframe your thinking about that, because the Premier League is now so all powerful, and killing everyone else, that you can have a situation where Nottingham Forest can spend more money than all the clubs in the other major leagues combined. So the idea of a player who's got to the level of playing for Spurs, who are a top 6 club in the Premier League, thereabouts, going to Atletico Madrid shouldn't really shock you, because Atletico Madrid maybe have a bit more prestige and more glamour about it. But Spurs, I know Atletico now, they have their financial issues, they do have some of the highest paid players, manager in the world, but they're leaving, they have debts. In reality, Spurs are in better nick than Atletico Madrid, and probably would be, if you offered a player, a sort of a put it on paper and say, who would you want to play for, Spurs or Atletico Madrid? I think most players in the world would probably say Spurs. But the Doherty one, how he ends up there. I mean, Matt Doherty, he's an interesting case study. He didn't have an agent for most of his football life. He was at Wolves, went from Bows obviously to Wolves. All through his mid-20s, early to mid-20s, Matt Doherty was a championship player with Wolves, and didn't really, he had stuff with his dad, did his representation, but he wasn't someone that was his contract news wouldn't have been making headlines. Then the Portuguese influence came into Wolves. Matt Doherty's performance, he bought into it, went with them, went to another level, got promoted. He was excellent, and it would have been a talking point at the time. Well, what's the story with Matt Doherty? His contract, I don't think he would have been. I think he would have been very lowly paid relative to other players. But Wolves had the big Jorge Mendes influence. He was an advisor to their owners. So obviously there was a bit of controversy around that. But they had the Portuguese, Nuno, the Wolves manager, was Jorge Mendes' first ever client back when he was a goalkeeper. And you had all these Portuguese players coming in, and sure enough, the way of the world, Matt Doherty ended up signing for Gestifoot, who have an Irish wing as well. They've got Gary Rogers scouting for them, and they're actually signing a lot of young Irish players, including Franco Ume, a kid from Cork who's joining Crystal Palace tonight. But Matt Doherty is a client of Gestifoot and by extension of Mendes. And when you go into the Mendes stable, and I remember speaking to people at the time when he signed up with them, it was almost a case of, well, you don't know what way things could go for him here now, in terms of the options, the moves that could happen, because when you're in that stable, I mean, he's such an influential figure within the game, and this is how transfers work. So, we went to Spurs then. Mourinho, Mendes, long-standing relationship with Mendes, was the manager. Nuno rocked up at Spurs afterwards. Mendes would have good connections with people at Spurs. So you have a situation in this window where Spurs are looking to bring in Pedro Porro from Portugal. Atletico Madrid need a right back. You need you need people, middlemen in the situation who work with all these clubs regularly and know that if someone needs to come in, someone needs to go out. And Matt Doherty is someone in that stable as such. It's not massively actually. I was still shocked when I heard it this morning. It was it has come out completely left field. It hasn't been one that's been flagged or privately people just not doing anything on it, but they know something's coming. Completely shocked by it. But it's sort of, when you hear it, it's it's not surprising. I think if it was, if Matt Doherty was still being represented, I don't know, by family or, you'd be a little bit more, that's a bit mad. But in this instance. Not it's just how the football world works, and who you sign with and who you're affiliated with will have a massive say on the doors that can open for you. Like the higher up you go in the game, the more that there's all these other layers that will influence deals, rather than it just being a sort of a championship manager style sort of transaction, where people do a search and looking for, there's all these other factors, and it's a big part of the game now at all levels, and who you go with can impact on where you can go. But I also think Matt Doherty's a good player who's very he's played as, people are almost can be a little bit sort of, there's a sarcastic tone to some elements of it, how has he got that move? And as I mentioned, just the Premier League is so strong now that people have to reframe their expectations around it, and understand that if he can play high up in the Premier League, he'll, Atletico Madrid of Molina from Argentina, World Cup winner, he's got good competition in the position, but presumably he's been brought in to have an involvement. But also, Matt Doherty generally has played his best football for Ireland against better teams. It's actually in some of the lesser games he can be a little bit frustrating at times, but watch Matt Doherty play against Portugal, ironically enough, the games, in particular the one in Faro, and he was excellent. And you sort of realise he's probably someone who could be quite suited with some of his attributes to play in a different country.
The super aged thing is fascinating. It's almost like Mendes is just moving chess pieces here and there, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And I mean, you have a situation now. I'm not saying that it's strictly the case, and I'm not saying it's the case in this instance, but generally, people probably would have people would think of an agent and think that an agent, the agents are people who represent players, whereas the landscape now is completely different. Agents act for clubs as well too.
Okay.
A lot of the business sometimes for agents now, you'll find, is that a club might contact an agent and say, we want to shift out this player, or we want to get in that player. And it's not so much a traditional thing where a footballer has his guy and he comes in. There's all these other actors and operators, and the further you go up the levels, almost the more layers that there is. Now, we've seen these massive super agents who just become incredibly influential, and they almost have a monopoly over the market then, because people believe, I won't get a move unless I'm with this agency or
that's
this
something
company.
That's nearly out there now, isn't it?
Oh, it is. Yeah. It's something where if you have a 19, 20-year-old hot prospect, they will come under pressure. And it's a classic thing you'll see now. You'll see someone, sign for an agency, and this can happen at all levels. And I maybe deal with it more here at a smaller level, but you see someone signing up with a particular agency, well, they're moving soon, and that's it does happen, and it shouldn't happen. In theory, there's a big talking point that I think one theory about this window and it being very active for certain big money deals is that I think after a couple more transfer windows, the agents' fees are going to be regulated a bit more, and the amounts they can receive are going to
make hay while the sun is shining.
So it's and again, this is more, we're talking more so about bigger deals, the Matt Doherty one's a 6-month loan, that's just a small one in the general scheme of things. But some of these bigger deals now, there does appear to be attempts to have some kind of regulation with it, but this is football now,
Ship has sailed, it feels like, doesn't it? It's going to be putting the toothpaste back in the tube here when it comes to regulating this at this stage. Like financial fair play, you get to a certain point, it's impossible to come back from it, and they're just a part of the game.
Yeah, no, they are. And I mean, we have a situation here, in this country now, where, and you speak to people about it, most players at sort of at League of Ireland under 19 level will have an agent in some shape or form, and you'd speak to people here about it, and it's there would have been a time 5-10 years ago where maybe a handful of players in the league might have had proper agents working for them, and they were generally ones that are looking to go away. Now, many trucks they all are, but now you'll have someone playing a sort of 10 or 12 games at underage level for sort of under 17, under 19 for Shells or Cork City or someone, and all of a sudden they've got an agent coming to the table. And in Ireland, the picture's changed again, but not I can then cover this road many times before, but Brexit, how the whole thing has changed. Anyway, and this is maybe the broader point as well about Matt Doherty, going to Atletico Madrid, and it's like, oh, it's like there's that whole thing reaction of it's a European club. I mean, Kevin Zeffy's at Inter Milan, Kyle Heffernan at AC Milan. Like more of this is going to happen. Like, you know, Irish players spreading their wings and going to, like, Doherty's a sort of an unusual case because he's such a senior pro. But like in the coming years, but like the point you would make is that actually in some cases, like the big Italian and Spanish like superpowers, as they might be discussed in general conversation, and someone listening, oh, he's gone to Atletico Madrid, oh, that's huge. But in many cases now, like, you know, Brighton could be Brighton and sort of, you know, Leicester or Nottingham Forest could be offering better packages, could be like bigger clubs in the context of the opportunities that can be, you know, offered to this player. And some of the other moves can be relatively cheap by comparison. And like that's the product of like the Premier League just being so powerful at the moment.
The Premier League is dwarfing most of the things.
As I said, yeah. I don't think it's healthy really. But then, you know, like that comes from a place of sort of talking about thinking that in some ways balancing the books in some ways matters. Like the whole football system in England now, if you look at it, and again, the Premier League, there's clearly massive money knocking around. But if you look down at the Championship, the losses that are racked up by clubs are frightening. But it's sort of okay because they'll always find an investor to come in and take over they will then try and chase the Premier League dream. And like you see it now, like, I mean, just like Nottingham Forest springs to mind because I would have been over there a couple of times when Martin O'Neill was there and the Martin O'Neill Roy Keane thing. And like at the time, like Forest had been in the Championship or but, you know, out of the Premier League for like 17 years. Like I think in the end it was 20 something when they got up, and now they've got into the Premier League and they are just throwing the cash around and they're buying players from like clubs who would be, you know, lads who could play in the Champions League in other countries who you would normally think that would be the benchmark where you want to play. But they want to play in the Premier League instead, you know. And this is what drives the Super League discussion. A lot of these things, it's because clubs in Spain and, you know, in particular Spain, are unhappy with this monopoly and then think, well, maybe we can use our strength to create something else that disrupts that. That's it, you know.
Can I just ask you, what would your interest be in, you know, Serie A, La Liga now? Compared, like I watched Serie A religiously when I was a young fella. It was just there and it was front and centre, and you know, it's such big names there. Whereas now, I don't know, it just seems so far in the distance now almost.
I don't know. I think it sort of comes and goes. Personally, like I think there's just sometimes you're trying so hard to keep up with where a lot of the Irish lads are, that it's harder to find it. Now it's different. Like you say, you know, if, like at Udinese at the moment, there's Festi, Abasele and James Abanqua. Abasele's been involved a couple of times. Abanqua hasn't been. He's been around the squad. So like if they're on, I would gravitate towards that, and that's where I would go. But if it's that versus, I mean, if it's that compared to, unfortunately, like Preston are playing in the Championship, I'd gravitate towards that. But that's maybe my own sort of work, sort of requirements. I think, I don't know, like I think the Liga thing, there was that period where the Classico became like it broke through into something that everyone was watching, like it was the ultimate game. And I think that has changed. I almost think even, I mean, maybe the stats don't add up, but like at times in the last couple of years, the Man City Liverpool games felt like this is the game you want to watch without the historic rivalry and all that comes with it. But you would have, like you had that sort of Messi Ronaldo era, but even go back to Figo and various contentious bits of history. Now, maybe a part of it as well is the Liga went off the sort of Sky channels where it actually had such a home, and like people's preferences are very, as much as like people have access to all sorts of ways of watching games now, legally and illegally or whatever it might be. There is still something about the familiarity of those sort of like 401, 402, 403, 404. And when it disappeared from that, I feel like it went out of sight and out of mind for a lot of people because it coincided with maybe the end of one particular era that would have grabbed a lot of people.
But just on, even outside of the Irish stuff, like I was watching Napoli and Roma the other night, and it's like, in Napoli are interesting, and there's a slight sense of a bit of a resurgence in Serie A, but even then you're watching it going, God, I wonder, like that guy's definitely going to the Premier League. You know, you're almost watching it, or you're thinking, Jesus, there's Chris Smalling and Tammy Abraham. You know, it's like out in the wilderness, playing for Roma. You know what I mean? But it
Yeah,
feels
yeah,
like
no, I
they're
know.
It feels like they're sort of like forgotten about, or sort of like former players in a way.
Yeah, and
You know, that's the reality of it.
Yeah, well, that's as like the Premier League is so all powerful, and then see the flip side is there would be this stereotype that would exist about Serie A being defensive and negative, which actually isn't true.
No,
Like, there's
not at
actually
all
like
anymore.
that's changed, like pretty dramatically, and like, at times. It's it's been, as much as Juventus had a dominant period, there have been like sort of these vibrant title races with Juventus are in bother again now, and it seems like history repeating with them. But it is true, and like look, sometimes that can be a reflection of a narrow-minded focus from our own perspective.
It's what you see more now, though.
Yeah,
isn't it? That's far away. You have to go and look for it now, almost.
You
know
do,
what I mean?
but like, I mean, and the Napoli story is true. That is one that sort of captures the imagination. But like again, like the high end of the Champions League, like you have the Villarreal stories. You do have teams that break through, but like it's a concentration of power again around like a small number of clubs. And I know, I mean, there's in saying that there have been English clubs that have struggled at times in the group stages in recent years, but generally, in football, like the teams who spend the most get to the top eventually. It's like this Newcastle thing. You think it's going to take time, but ultimately, like your spend, while it doesn't hold true for everyone, and people can shout in examples of clubs, even the Premier League have spent loads of money and had bad season, but generally over time it levels out. And the power of the Premier League now, it just has a drop down effect everywhere. And like to the extent, the Championship now in England, there's a huge money flying around the Championship. Like the Championship again, is one of the biggest leagues in Europe at the moment. And then the drop down from that is League One, which is and maybe in our old, we go back to our teenage minds, I think, and our perceptions sometimes. And even with the Matt Doherty thing, I think there's a little bit of that. As like you're thinking Spurs to Atletico Madrid.
Oh, totally.
There's a big thing about that. Whereas now, you've look at League One, who are coming over and taking a lot of players from here, and people are like, oh, he's going to the third division. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, he is going to the third division, but I mean, the level of income and sort of elements that exist around that level even are sort of scary. And I don't know, Mick, I don't know where it stops really. Like you always assume that something propped up by TV, like the TV money, and particularly the overseas TV deals now more than the sort of English domestic ones. You assume there's a bubble at some stage, but there's been times in recent years, like Chelsea looked like they were done for with the Abramovich stuff. But because you have the opportunity to buy in, to take over, an established club in the Premier League elite, they found someone with loads of money to come in who was just throwing it around in an even more reckless way, you could argue, than the spending before. So
that might be inarguable, actually.
Yeah, no,
given what we've seen this month.
It's just, it's sort of crazy, really. But again, I go back to the point, like everyone loves transfers, and like the fans are like, you see how some of the stuff is teased out. Chelsea signed someone for a huge amount of money, and like, I'm not having a go at like journalists. I would do this myself. You do teasers, but it's almost like, and they're not done. It's like the sort of the end of like, I don't know, some wrestling show or something, like, and which would be right up your street.
Definitely.
Coming next week, or like, oh no, here comes someone out, here comes another player.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, surely they can't buy another one. And they can, but people want to see who it is.
Yeah, in wrestling they do vignettes, basically like an interview or teaser to tee up like a wrestler coming. I'd love to see something like that in soccer, but I can't see it.
Yeah,
That's what we're getting now with like announcements and stuff like that, which have been brilliant, that the clubs are doing themselves, where they'll pick, like I think somebody had one from Shrek there recently. It's like a lot of the clubs are doing those.
Social media, the Michael Obafemi
one. Exactly. Yeah.
Remember the Santi Cazorla one? Where he was, it was somewhere in Spain, was it? And he was
Villarreal,
like,
I think,
Villarreal, and it was just like it's like a tube in the middle of the pitch with a load of smoke, and he's just standing there like that with his arms crossed when all the kind of smoke clears or whatever. But it was a mad way to announce a player. But
Santi Cazorla in Qatar now. That's where he is. He's living his life out there.
But actually, even announce somebody becoming like a part of the vernacular. Your point about how people love transfers. Sky Sports News wouldn't be doing basically become transfer television for a month, in January, if people weren't watching it, people weren't into it. We had Matt Slater on from The Athletic a few months ago. He wrote a piece about kind of people the point you made at the start here about people are more interested sometimes in transfers and the story of football and who's gone where.
Speculation.
And they aren't actually watching the stuff. And the Athletics, Matt said that the Athletics analytics would suggest that's absolutely the case. That their interest comes from transfer speculation, how a transfer happened. Like good journalism, like in-depth stuff, but ultimately not about the game.
Yeah, I'll listen.
And they have loads of tactic stuff that probably does well too, but not the transfers is what drives the needle.
No, but listen, that's it. And I mean, I know myself, like if I'm doing a story about, say, an Irish player, and it could be a reasonably low profile enough one, like, I just mentioned, I suppose, the player that's gone today, or has gone from Cork, Crystal Palace, and there's one Mark on Matney going to Brighton last week. And like, you put out that story that really, to be honest, in this country doesn't necessarily register too much beyond the club he's at, and some people are curious to go, what's the story with the clauses or whatever. But you'll find that the odd one will just completely take off in terms of like an English audience, because it's like, or like the poor lad at Crystal Palace, like Crystal Palace are just signing a young player for the future, and you're getting all this snark from Palace fans going, this is not what we want. Like, we were promised a striker in this window. And it's almost like you get a bit of abuse for not being like, they announce a pretty standard piece of business. You sign a young player for the future that every club should be doing, but you get met with a volley of abuse going, no, why haven't you signed this French lad we've been linked with on YouTube, that I've seen a YouTube clip on, and it's clearly brilliant. Why can't we sign him? So it's but again, we're all in some ways part of that discussion. Like, we're all coupled, but it's like, the intrigue around the business of the game now, like it holds people's attention, as Mick says, sometimes for longer than the mechanics of a 90-minute game.
So the football show is brought to you by Sky. Watch every live Premier League game this season on Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports. We'll be back with more news, transfer news, an update on Evan Ferguson, and we'll be speaking about Michael Obafemi's move to Burnley after the break.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Watch every single live Premier League game this season on Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports.
This is News Talk.
So we're a family of 5 looking for health insurance. 2 sporty teenagers, 1 child. Do we all need the same cover? And what about MRIs, CTs and cancer care? Am I covered?
It's okay. You don't need to be an authority on health insurance, because that's us, the Health Insurance Authority. Call us or visit hia.ie for free, impartial information on health cover.
Guaranteed Irish business members continue to sustain jobs and communities across Ireland.
Like Big Red Cloud, whose award-winning accounts and payroll software is exactly what your business needs. Fully automated features like bank feeds and importing invoices gives you more time to work on your business and not in it. Now with free training in conjunction with KWETB. For a free trial, go to bigredcloud.com/training. So look out for the G, guaranteedirish.ie. Altogether better.
For over 25 years, Timber Living has been building Ireland's premier residential log cabins. Stylish, cosy, low maintenance and built to last. Timber Living cabins feature double wall construction and high-grade windows and insulation. They're affordable too, with a cabin to suit every budget. Perfect for year-round living. Timber Living log cabins are also ideal as a garden office, granny flat or holiday home. Take a 3D walk through our cabin range at timberliving.ie or drop into our show cabins in Carlow, Cork and Roscommon. Timber Living, Ireland's favourite log cabins.
When it comes to Polestar, the proof is in the driving. From the enjoyment of minimalistic modern design to the excitement of pure electric performance. But describing it wouldn't do justice to the experience. After all, the proof is in the driving. Visit Polestar.com to book a test drive of the all-electric Polestar 2.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky. All the football you love in one place. Across Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports.
Welcome back to the football show. Delighted to have Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent in studio, and we also have OTB's Mick McCarthy. Mick, you might just run through a few updates because there's a few things happening.
Yeah, 1 or 2. We're still waiting on Matt Doherty to complete the loan move to Atletico. Jorginho to Arsenal from Chelsea, like the league leaders buying a player like a player like Jorginho. It's just an interesting move. It's 12 million. He was out of contract at the end of the season. That has been completed. that's probably the most interesting move that has actually been completed so far. But there's a couple more on the way. Marcel Sabitzer, he's officially at Carrington now. He has. They've been tracking his move all the way from Germany. It's been one of those classics. Like, he's in the air. He's at the airport. Honestly, this is what I was hearing during the day. Will O'Callaghan just shouting out, "He's at the airport. He's at the airport." So he's actually at Carrington now. So it looks like he'll be signing on loan from Bayern Munich for the end of the season. It's kind of cover for Christian Eriksen, who's going to miss about 3 months, it looks like. Enzo Fernandez is apparently undergoing his medical in Lisbon ahead of moving to Chelsea, so that looks like it's going to be 120 million and should be completed tonight. Not confirmed yet. The Jorginho thing is completed. I already mentioned that. Chelsea's Hakim Ziyech, it looks like he could be on the way to PSG as well. Keylor Navas is going to sign for Forest, again not done yet. Obviously Dan mentioned Franco Ume going to Crystal Palace, and Gavin Kilkenny has moved to Charlton on loan from Bournemouth. He was at Stoke, wasn't he, Dan?
So yeah, he went on loan to Stoke, but just didn't work out. I suppose Michael O'Neill left as well.
Yeah,
they brought him there, and he's gone to Charlton, down a division. Yeah.
And then one other piece of Irish news is that kind of unexpected one actually is that Shane Duffy has actually signed permanently for Fulham. He was on loan there, but Fulham can only have 2 lone players in the squad, and they're signing Cedric Suarez from Arsenal, who's a full back there. So I don't know, to make room for Suarez, they're signing a player on loan. They could have probably just sent it back to Brighton, I'd imagine, but.
I think I'd imagine that the terms of their agreement the recall might not have been there, or the option to recall. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
it does seem particularly odd because like Fulham were playing in the FA Cup at the weekend against Sunderland. And I remember looking at the team going, even Shane Duffy's not even playing in this cup match. Yeah. And the assumption when he went there, start of the season, was he was going to go and play. A newly promoted team, signing a sort of an established Premier League centre back who did well last year. And he hasn't played at all, pretty much. I think he's made, 5 appearances. But clearly, I mean, we go back to earlier on and like how football works. Clearly it's cheaper to sign someone you're not using on a permanent basis than face the dread of missing out on the player you want to bring in now. Now I don't know what type of permanent deal they've signed him on. We're going to wait for that to come through. His year at Brighton was up. It could be a very short-term deal, whereby this is just like a loophole that you find. Because, I don't know, they'll probably have to accompany it with a press release and a statement where someone has to say, you know, we see Shane as a part of a long-term future of the club. We plan to play him eventually. Like, even though he's like 31, it's not as if he's one for the future. And that's not been disrespectful. Like, you know, big Shane Duffy fan, and from what he actually could do, his comeback at Brighton was brilliant. So it has been disappointing. It's like he's actually sort of dropped off the map completely. Even in the Irish discussion, you'd be very worried about like Shane Duffy not playing. But now everyone, but looking at Nathan Collins and Egan is coming back up, it seems, of Sheffield United. Amoba Badele, Darrow O'Shea, people aren't as fixated on Shane Duffy's situation, which is a shame because he's a capable player. But again, he's got his own story to tell about. I'd love to know how it's just, if this is genuinely as it's being presented, how they go up to him and say, listen, we need to do this.
Yeah,
to get
it feels like
in.
it's just it's a paper pushing move, really.
Pretty much,
yeah. One other thing that I didn't mention actually is that Pedro Porro, the Sporting Lisbon fullback, is in London at the moment having a medical for Spurs. So you'd imagine that's what's holding up the Doherty thing, is like once they sign it, they can release that. Once they sign,
yeah, you'd assume so. Yeah, there is another Atletico player going to Forest, but he's more of a centre half, but. I'd imagine this is what happens. Like a lot of flurry of this stuff just goes through between 10 and 11, and a lot of it is just, like you get your papers lodged. You have this thing now where the transfer papers are actually, so you find out tomorrow morning that some other deals are actually, have been done as well late in the day, but you need to just submit them to Premier League headquarters by 11 p.m. I think there was one a couple of years back, was it Stephen Kelly was going somewhere, but it was the year we had the snow. Do you remember there was like snow around that time of year, and it was that you got caught up in transit and had to fax it through. But I think there was some kind of, they worked around it, So yeah, I'd imagine that's exactly it. That like the reports all day from this morning about the Matt Doherty one, that this was happening and he's gone there. So it would be very unlucky if it all collapsed now.
Can I just ask you a last question about agents and fees and things? Like anecdotally, what are the percentage commission fees we're talking here? I know that's probably why they wanted regulated, but I'd imagine some of these deals are skewed fairly well in favour of agents.
Oh, it could be anything, yeah, and especially when you talk about agents working for clubs as well, because again, people would think of, say, a player's agent and I don't know, you get 2 or 3% or 4% of like wages, or a new contract deal or a fee or whatever it can be, and it can be a relationship between the player and the agent.
Yeah.
But when you throw in like agents working for clubs on like 100 million, 200 million transfers, like like Mino Raiola, the late Mino Raiola, like around various deals was able to go and look for tens of millions himself, to make something happen. So this is it. Like even the grey area around, there are meant to be like agents exams and all these things, but it's a little bit it's a bit ad hoc in some ways. Like, people can be advisors, not agents, and they can have it's not really formalised in the way that it's meant to be. But as Mick suggests, like the horse is bolted from there. Like even if there's retrospective things people try and do now, the power still exists in the hands of a few who will, as you mentioned, sort of allude to, like they'll control the chess pieces in a lot of business that happens.
Dan, Michael Obafemi's moved to Burnley, who are obviously going well in the Championship. You'd have to think on paper that looks a positive move for him.
Yeah, like a sort of it is. Yeah, I mean, like Burnley are going to be promoted. I suppose the only thing is, it seems to be a loan. It looks like one of those again where like they're probably, although they're not saying it, it's been reported or alluded to that they have to sort of follow through and buy him in the summer. Again, like Burnley are going up, so they're going into the big league where anything can happen, as I mentioned, like get the Premier League money and who knows. But on paper, it's a great opportunity for him. He's had a couple of instances in his career which would worry you a small bit, just in terms of like question marks about his attitude that have been raised at various times. I think Damien Delaney was on here on Saturday talking about it. But we've seen glimpses with Ireland of how good he can be on a good day, and he's going to a decent club. Vincent Kompany, the manager. They've been decent this year in terms of like their performances. Josh Cullen is there, who's sort of a well-regarded character, and you would hope that this is the move that gives him some kind of stability to sort of showcase ability and sort of deliver. Because it feels like the last couple of years, even he's been in a state of flux a lot of the time. Even when once he went from Southampton to Swansea and started doing well, there was speculation straight away, which again suggested there was probably people around him pushing him in directions too. Yeah. And now he's got the big move now that presumably he was angling for. Now to sort of the balls in his court.
Is there a pressure to make this move?
There is, yeah, there is. I mean, like, so you see this, like, again, we talk about, I'm not talking again in Obafemi's instance, but generally in some players now, and we'll probably talk about Evan Ferguson in a minute, like, the dream is to get to that big Premier League contract. Like, that's to something, and I mean, I wouldn't underestimate the sacrifice and the work that's involved to get to that. But you do see with some of these players that once they get to that sort of top of their mountain, they don't push on, and they drop off from there. And so that question mark, it exists around Obafemi. He could argue, he'll probably give interviews at various stages and saying it's unfair. He's not, it's very harsh, and he'll give his own opinion. Like, people have worked with him, managers would say different things, but the thing is, it's his stage now. Like, he's going to Burnley. All of this is forgotten. Like the news cycle moves on very fast. Like, Aaron Connolly has a bit of a reputation to shed, but scored 2 goals at the weekend. If he does that for the next 6 weeks, 2 months, that will get forgotten quickly enough. Yeah. You move on, the story moves on. Obafemi just needs to go in and play for Burnley like he did for Swansea last year, and if he does, like, he's in a great position. Like, I think someone like Evan Ferguson comes along and is so exciting, and everyone's sort of captivated by him. And he's 18, but like, you do forget, I suppose Obafemi did just turn 23 this month. Aaron Connolly's just turned 23 this month. Like, Adam Ida's in that age bracket as well. Like, these lads have loads of time left, actually.
Yeah, of course.
But it's up to them, how they use it.
Just on Ferguson, I'm just kind of an outsider looking in, and I kind of see how we maybe lose the run of ourselves quite quickly. Is that the question I'd ask is the hype real?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of years, like, I would, see Evan Ferguson to a lot of people, say, working in the game in this country, and you speak to people who are like follow schoolboy football and League of Ireland underage, like they've been watching Evan Ferguson for years. You know, like, naturally he bursts onto the mainstream now as such in the last couple of weeks, couple of months, and everyone's talking about him. But like with the sort of strikers I've mentioned, and you can throw Troy Parrott into the mix as well, you would have like spoken to different people. You'd speak to people all the time, be it sort of agents or, you know, just people who watch football, you know, ex-players, managers of clubs, and you'd ask for opinions about players coming through, and someone might say, yeah, I like Ida, he'll be the one, and someone will say someone else, and you'd have different views. But everyone has always been pretty adamant that Ferguson is going to be the real deal, you know, and not just people who are trying to sell him to you because it's their client or something like that, like people who have no stake in the game but would just have said a couple of years back, yeah, like this fella actually has got everything, and just fingers crossed he gets lucky with injuries. It was the only fear I would have with someone like him, and that's the thing, when he's crumpled on the pitch on Sunday, thinking, oh, we've jinxed it here by talking about this. But like his dad is from, you know, has spent his life in the football world. Barry, like he was in
Works
England.
at the FAI, does he?
Yeah, he was in England. He was in England as a kid with Coventry, and amongst other clubs. Came home, had a sort of a decent League of Ireland career here. You know, I think Evan was born around 10 days before his dad played in an FAI Cup final. You know, and like sort of steeped in the game here. Really works for the FAI. So he's grown up in an environment that he understands the business, and he's like, his sister is also very talented. She's on a sports scholarship in America, and you just like, this stuff does matter, and it's not like, you know, there's great pros come from all sorts of situations.
It does help from his pedigree,
but it does help.
Yeah.
It does help, and you know, in any code like that can translate. So you know, maybe a couple of people would have watched him when he was younger. He was like a man at 14 in terms of his physique. There would have been that big debate: is it right for like Bowes to bring him on against Chelsea that time? People thought, oh, like they're putting him in the shop window. The deal to Brighton was actually already in place at that stage, and he would have been around Bowes during the only sort of disappointment for me in a way is that when he did play a couple of good times for Bowes in the league, it was in the closed door season where no one could go. But now I think, like, I'm always conscious of, you don't want this clip to be replayed to you in a period of time where you've got on board. And I think sometimes you do see players burst onto the scene and people get excited about them, but you have a cautious note because you hear a couple of tales about not so sure about the attitude, and they've, like, even when Aaron Connolly came on the scene, say people here would have been like, brilliant, this is fantastic, but they would have been about, well, you know, he's not in the Ireland under-19 squad at the moment because he's had a couple of issues with staff there, and that plants a little seed that it may not be plain sailing for him. It might, like, there's growing pains here that you just have to, and hopefully he's the other side of them now. But Ferguson doesn't appear that those concerns don't exist.
Injury-wise, how
doesn't seem that the indications are from the early scans it's no serious damage, but still to be clarified. You presume there's going to be some kind of layoff, but all the suggestions are he's feeling good, and the first scans have revealed that, like, you know, the worst case scenarios have been avoided. So you presume there'll have to be some kind of layoff, but fingers crossed it's not a serious, a complicated one or a long one.
Throwing this at you, Dan, but I don't know if we've talked about this. Do we know the circumstances of the choice of Brighton over Liverpool? Because I think it goes to what you're saying about, like, someone that's coming up in the game and has a lot of, like, good advice and understands kind of what's ahead rather than chasing the dream and the big name and the possibility of, like, being stuck at a club like Liverpool for years trying to get your, you know, where he probably knew he was close enough to ready for first team football, you know. Do we know the circumstances, or is it just as simple as what I'm saying? Well,
see, Brighton have a huge footprint in Ireland as well, which is sort of, like, worth sort of mentioning. Like, Paddy McCourt's brother Leroy would be involved in scouting for players here. John Morling, who is now actually back with the FAI sort of as a football consultant, but would have been the head of the Brighton Academy at the time when Ferguson was signed, having previously worked in the FAI for a long period of time. And so, like, I'm actually, I don't know if this is what happened, but, like, John Morling would obviously you know, if he's speaking to the family, like, you know, he would know Barry, I'm sure, and like, we're working a lot of the same circles. I mean, Brighton have signed a lot of players from Ireland, like, and continue to do so. It has a reputation of being like a terrific academy. They would previously have had Dan Ashworth, who's gone to Newcastle now. Like, everything would be top notch there, but they also show that there's a pathway. So I'm guessing that, like it was part of the progression. Like, there's almost parallels with Nathan Collins in a way, who's, again, his dad is from the ex-footballer. Nathan Collins had all sorts of opportunities to go to bigger clubs than the clubs he's been at, but went to Stoke, saw a pathway to playing. That has led him to get to where he is now at 21. You know, Evan Ferguson saw a pathway. They were able to sort of get him over just before the Brexit door closed as such, and he's you know, clearly, like, I think I don't know if Brighton are able to give assurances, but you can look and see, this club gives people a chance, and it's not about taking the maybe the best, the biggest, most glamorous offer straight away. But yeah, I think Brighton have a good reputation, and that's why you see a lot of people picking there. A lot of the Irish kids going there now would have other options as well too.
Fitness permitting, is he parachuted into the Ireland situation, or are we biding our time? Or
I mean, Stephen Kenny brought him in for the 2 games in November. He's got 2 caps already, albeit off the bench. But I mean, and Kenny thought he would move on loan in January and take off, and then he wanted, I think, to have him around the squad so that when he comes in March, it wouldn't be like his first time around, which can sometimes be overwhelming for players. Sometimes it's not. But he's got that out of the way. And as it happened, he's made that breakthrough with Brighton instead. So I think of it like he'll come straight in. He's technically in already, but you know, to sort of competitive games, he is going to have to take central billing because he's just such a good player. You know, and I think there's still part of me that wonders, like, is he 100% picked for the France game? I think my once he's fit and everything's fine, and he's played a couple of games in the build up, and this injury isn't that bad. I'm now thinking, like, he probably has to play him. I wouldn't have been sure of it initially because of the nature of the game, but then you watch him, he's played against Konate a couple of times, and as much as I've talked a couple of times about, well, in that game Ireland might want to sort of a counter-attack and approach, but actually, like, Ferguson holds the ball up so well that that's what you need maybe in that type of game to take a little bit of the pressure off you if you're struggling. So no, like, it's, you know, his life is sort of, you know, the nature of it, like, it's, you know, life changes like very quickly for him, and you have to be prepared with someone of that age that at some point along the way there's going to be a little slump, or there's going to be a point where a manager wants to take him out of a team and mind him. But I think Ireland are in a situation where they can't bide their time too much, and if you think you have, like, what a lot of people believe is going to be a top Premier League striker, then maybe you just have to seize the day and do it now.
Strike while the iron is hot. Mick, any other bits of updates or anything coming through?
Nothing that I've seen to update on what we've already talked about. We're still waiting on confirmation on Fernandez, on Sabitzer, and is there anybody else that we're hanging on for? But they're I think probably the 2 main ones that are going to happen tonight, but as yet have not. And obviously Matt Doherty as well.
No doubt there'll be plenty more happening in the next hour. Daniel McDonnell from the Irish Independent, thanks a million for joining us.
No worries, Michael.
The football show is brought to you by Sky. Watch every live Premier League game this season on Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky, proud partner and supporter of the Republic of Ireland women's national football team.
This is News Talk.
Join VHI Healthcare today for just €61.99 per adult per month on our First Care 500 day-to-day plan and unlock a wide range of services. Search VHI First Care to join today. Terms and conditions apply. VHI Healthcare DAC trading as VHI Healthcare is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Guaranteed Irish business members continue to sustain jobs and communities across Ireland.
There's a name you may not know behind many Irish business successes, like helping delivery pizza arrive on time or navigating the property market online. It's Geo Directory, Ireland's leading